Neighbor cell phones by calling code enforcement on himself. We bought our house 4 years ago. During the showing, inspections, appraisal and approval by the city, no one said anything about the neighbor's fence that spanned from the front right corner of his house, if looking at them from the street, across his driveway with a gate, to the front left corner of my house. This effectively blocked me from accessing a 30-foot LX4W strip of my own property. It was all grass that he mowed. Later that year in November I noticed a tiny bit of water seeping into the basement on that side of the house. We had just gotten through our third historic, once in 100 years, rainfall of the year. A quick ocular pat-down of that side of the house showed a slight slope towards my house. I planned to hire someone in the spring to slope it away and install a French drain so I didn't flood his driveway, like a good neighbor. The next spring I hired the crew, they went over and started working. The neighbor, a 60-ish-year-old who looks 80 according to my wife, came out all hot screaming at these guys wondering what they were doing on his property. Mind you, I had never had issue with a siding repair who accessed that same side or the cable guy or a plumber who all accessed that side many time before. He gave him a hard time for a few minutes. They blew it off and thought he had been day drinking. They sloped, tilled, mulched and left a nice flower bed for future use. The next year, last year, I planted some roses in the bed and hired out a company to do a whole yard clean out. They got to that side to pull weeds and lay fresh mulch and the old man came screaming out of his house telling them to get off his property. He even took a half-assed punch/swipe at one of the guys, calling them all dirty Mexicans. These guys were white so that made no sense. I came out and he started yelling at me, saying they were messing up his yard and he wanted me to pay to resod. I said no way. He called me a bitch over and over again. I told them to ignore that side. I spoke with my wife and we both agreed, if he wants to be a dick, we'll just be petty and let that overgrow so he can look at it. You can't really see it from the street so I didn't care. Weeds were 4 foot tall by the end of the summer. This spring was wet, so the weeds were knee-high by the start of May. I was outside mowing when he came over the fence, got in my face and asked, "When are you gonna clean this shit up?" I said, "When I have assurances you won't harass me or workers, then I will clean it up." This upset him. He started calling me a bitch over and over again. Even threw in the word lazy for good measure. I said, "Call the city," and ignored him. He turned his attention to the other neighbors and started raising holy hell with them. My house, while older, is well maintained and carefully landscaped. His house has aluminum siding from the 80s. He doesn't edge any of the walks or driveway and he has old aluminum awnings that are filthy. His back patio has tall weeds between the pavers. I say nothing about it. It's not mine and honestly, he's keeping values down enough that the taxman didn't raise my rates. So I just don't care. The next day, code enforcement knocks on my door. He called. The guy said, "I'm not sure why I am here. I see no weeds, you have a nice home. Can you show me where he thinks these weeds are?" So we went to the side of the house. Code enforcement see his fence blocking my access. "Welp, nothing I can do to you but he has 10 days to remove that fence. He also needs to weed his patio, and edge the sidewalk." The next morning his wife came over and asked if I would split the cost of removing the fence. I said, "Sorry, but us bitches are out of charity money this week." Now there's an old man sweating in the heat removing the fence and I can hear him calling his kids to come help because their old man couldn't keep his mouth shut. He could at least tolerate someone in his grass to make it look nice but no. Tomorrow, now that I have access, I'm removing those roses and putting hem somewhere I can enjoy them. The mulch will be removed, I'll lay down some landscaping plastic and cover the whole thing in pea gravel. You want to be a dick? Fine, look at the shitty side of my house. Comments.
Maybe he should have considered, being a good neighbor? Then he wouldn't be out in the heat, doing hard labor. I had a horrendous neighbor who tried to weaponize code enforcement on me. What she didn't count on was the neighbor on the other side of her house, whom she'd also treated like crap. In a perfect example of why it pays to get to know your neighbors, he was the head of city code enforcement, and she didn't get anywhere trying to get me in trouble for things she was doing herself. He and I had a little block party in front of her house when she put it on the market. I'm super cool with all the neighbors, and the first year I moved in, this guy told me all about the roses he used to have in his front yard. So I planted roses for him without asking what he wanted to be a nice guy. I can't see them, and you can't see them from the street. Now he gets nothing. Maybe a strip of sand, so that you can attract feral cats to leave him little treasures. That's not a bad idea. We do have neighborhood cats.
The university made me write an acknowledgement in my thesis, so I did. A weary me was sitting in front of my laptop, staring at the requirements for submitting the PhD thesis to the university. I had finished the main text to the satisfaction of my 2 supervisors, and I just needed to check the nitty-gritty formatting requirements from the university. Among the items missing was the acknowledgement section. The university even made a big fuss out of it, stating that it was mandatory to thank everyone who has contributed to the success of the thesis. I couldn't help thinking about how bitter the journey was. It started well, I got a scholarship, performed well and had a great reputation in teaching, but it was a fallout after my supervisor retired due to unforeseen circumstances. Research funds dried out. The school scammed me of 10 grand from equipment purchase because of the errors of the administrative staff. They took away the only space I could use for research, which was just a desk, and left me figuring it out myself. In the end I could only finish the whole research on my own from the cash I earned from escorting. It was a successful career, but that's another story. And then I needed to thank them to not make myself look like an ungrateful brat. And I came up with an idea. Instead of writing a short note, I dialed my gratefulness to 11. Most other PhD students wrote 1 to 2 pages, and I made mine 3 pages long. I thanked almost everyone extensively, my supervisors, my family, my patrons, the student counselor and even the flight school I attended, and mentioned the details of the support they gave me and what I learned from them. At the very end of the 3-page essay, I dropped a very dry paragraph acknowledging the university, thanking them for the wake-up call for my development into another career and giving me an experience to foster autonomy by doing my own maintenance works and sourcing own fundings. Now this PhD thesis has passed the final validation, and by university policy, this thesis will be forever publicly available in their library and online repository. And I am pretty sure a few of the juniors are going to have a look as a reference of how to write their acknowledgements even though they have zero interest in the body text. Comments.
It would be tempting to be more blunt than that, if you're willing to burn bridges. Acknowledgements. University policy requires that every published thesis includes an acknowledgement section that outlines the people who supported the author in their academic endeavors. The author has intentionally left the section blank. Thanks to the university, helping with grants for 2 years. Unfortunately, it took 4 years to finish this degree. Thanks to the university for taking $10,000 for my equipment. Unfortunately, the admin didn't order it, etc. The Passive-Aggressive Acknowledgement Hall of Fame just got a new inductee. 3 pages of effusive praise and the university gets 1 dry paragraph about fostering autonomy is genuinely chef's kiss level pettiness. Also, now I'm curious about the flight school. To the janitor who always had an open ear after a long day of exhausting research, thank you, Joel, and also your wonderful dog Poochie for all the cuddles. May the sun always shine on you and your loved ones. To the university, thanks for providing the building.
I made sure her toe is stubbed every time. I grew up sharing a room with my sister, but eventually I basically stopped having a room at all. She was unbelievably messy. The only visible carpet was a narrow path between her bed, dresser, and the door. She'd borrow the car we shared without warning, steal my money, stay up late constantly, and make the room miserable to be in. Eventually I only went in there to change clothes. Most nights I ended up sleeping in the basement, waiting for my dad to finish his nightly TV routine so I could finally get some peace and quiet. I cried out of frustration more than once. So when my sister finally moved out, I was thrilled. The room became mine, and it was the biggest bedroom in the house. I cleaned it top to bottom until there wasn't a trace of her left, even though she'd abandoned tons of junk behind. Fast forward 2 years, she moves back in. Everyone in the family was quietly wondering if I'd give the bedroom back. Absolutely not. She got the smaller room down the hall instead, along with the cat she brought home that now wakes everyone up at night while she's out enjoying her nightlife. The petty revenge part? She still comes into my room because I have the best mirrors in the house, so I've started accidentally leaving random things in the hallway outside my room. Nothing harmful, just enough to make her mutter under her breath when she bumps into them during her trips to my mirrors. Comments.
If there's a smaller room down the hall, why did you have to share with her in the first place? 3 siblings, me and my sister shared the big room. Brother had small room. I was going to make my kids share the big room, and then I figured out the youngest doesn't sleep well. Middle of the night random screaming like she was being murdered in her sleep, until she was like 5. So the crib got moved into my husband and my room. Growing kids need sleep, adults can live on coffee. I had a similar situation where I had a family member who I didn't want in my bedroom. I got fishing line and hung about 20 tiny paper airplanes, like the size of a fingernail, suspended in the ceiling by clear push pins. See, I walked around my room the same way every time and I never ran into them. When someone else came into my room, they would always walk into them and pull them down from the ceiling, get startled and leave my room. I could tell they were in my room because the fishing line would be on the floor. They never admitted it, but it was obvious. They couldn't look me in the eye and they walked away from me. I booby-trapped my own room without causing any damage to anything, and it kept out unwanted visitors. My mom used to come into my room to put towels down the laundry chute. She'd put her clothes down my brother's chute. His room was above my room and our closets were stacked. The chute ran through them. Her room and the kitchen didn't have chutes. My brother would sleep through it. He was always a heavy sleeper. She'd wake me every time. I told her to leave the kitchen towels outside of my room, and I'd put them down the chute when I came out in the morning. Nope. She kept coming in. Sometimes she'd be on the phone, too. I locked my door. She got it quickly after that, and I'd often wake to towels outside the door. I tossed them down the chute as promised. And don't feel I was holding her up. She could walk them downstairs to the laundry herself. She wasn't allowed to wake me for her convenience.
Park in my loading bay, enjoy getting your car off a stack of pallets. Long, true, and overly detailed. As a teenager, I worked on an island at a grocery store as the store receiver. Technically I was the night receiver, but I worked 9 to 6 p.m. and was in charge of receiving the most important truck of the day, getting it unloaded, all our garbage and returns and extra pallets, cardboard etc. loaded, and back out the door in time for it to drive halfway around the island and catch the same ferry it had come on, before it left. So time was of the absolute essence. The island is a pretty chill place in the winter, but in the summer it is a rich man's playground, and we often got people parking in our loading bay, so 30 minutes before the truck comes, I always put out 3-foot-tall cones. One day a lady in a red convertible decided to push aside one of the cones and parks directly in our loading bay. I saw her do it and ran out after her, telling her to move. She refused and went into the store anyhow claiming, I know Danny, store owner, and he said it was fine. Well, I also knew Danny, and knew he didn't say it was fine, but after making repeated announcements and instructing all the cashiers not to let her check out and pay until she moved the car, she came fuming out and moved her car. The next morning the store owner Danny asked me what happened, and I told him exactly what I had done, as the truck was on its way. He told me that was fine, and he would speak to her. Surprise surprise, she did in fact know Danny, but he hadn't given her permission to park in our dock. He did ask me not to tow her car, as she was his neighbor, but said since it was a convertible, he didn't see why we couldn't pull her a brake and push it out of the way. Which sure enough is exactly what we did a week later when she again parked in between my cones, and then facing the loading bay door, where I was giving her a clear look flipped me off. I went inside got a couple other grocery guys, and after releasing the handbrake on her little red convertible, just pushed it straight across the parking lot. It barely gave enough room for our truck to get in, and she was completely blocked in for 30 minutes while I unloaded it. She came into the back of the store as I was unloading trucks, and in order to stop a pallet from hitting her, the loading bay was at a wicked angle, I had to jam my foot under the pallet jack wheels, causing it to jump over my steel toes and land on my foot. I screamed at her to get out of my loading bay and she was so shocked she actually did. Well, the next afternoon, when I came in to get some things I needed to finish reporting, which I could do from home, as my shift manager had already approved a couple days off to heal my foot, Danny didn't know any of this yet, as he had just arrived and immediately asked to speak to me. I had already been to the hospital and filled out my workers' comp forms about the injury. Fortunately my foot wasn't broken, but was extremely badly bruised. Danny, actually a really decent boss, said he had a complaint from a customer about me screaming and swearing at a customer, and wanted to know my side of the story. I asked if it was the same lady with the red car, and he confirmed it was, which to him confirmed that I had in fact screamed at her. I then asked him if he had seen the security tapes from the dock. There are several cameras. He hadn't, so I told him that until he had watched the tapes I didn't want to say anything. In front of me he pulled up the tape, so he saw me on the dock, asking the lady not to park there. He saw her flip me off and leave the car anyhow. A few minutes later he saw me push her car with the grocery clerks, and then he saw how it was blocked by our truck. Switching to the inside cameras he saw how she pushed right past the employee-only doors and barged into the loading bay, and how I had used my own foot to stop her from being smashed by the pallet of milk I was whizzing down the loading bay. I literally saved her life with my foot. You couldn't see my foot or what stopped the pallet jack, but by then I had my shoe and sock off, and Danny only took one look at my bruised foot to understand the cause for my rather loud yelling that was being showed on the screen. Funny how red car lady forgot to mention all these things when she was complaining to him. Danny said, if she ever parked in the loading bay again to call a tow truck immediately, regardless of the time of day. He knew full well that I could have had a much more serious injury because of this lady, and even after having an entire pallet of milk on my foot, and admittedly screaming at her to get out of the loading bay, I hadn't in fact even swore at her. And if I wanted to, I could have used the injury to get a lot more time off work, costing the business a lot of money. Instead of the 2 days, I really did need to feel like I could walk again. While, the next week came and went, and sure enough Friday afternoon who pulls up and parks not in the loading bay, but in front of the dumpster beside the loading bay, still effectively blocking our truck from making the wide turn to get into the bay. Sure, there are no cones there, but I was done. I didn't even say anything to her as she flipped me off again, like she thinks she won somehow. I called a tow truck, but sadly they were on an accident and couldn't come for an hour, so I grabbed the produce guy, and a grocery guy, this time unable to push her car, as she has put the top onto it, and rolled the windows up. I didn't care. I just took the pallet jack, and had the produce guy drag out a few pallets. I put a pallet under her car, and using the pallet jack lifted and moved her car all the way across the parking lot, and then dropped it onto a stack of 2 more pallets. Her tires weren't even on the ground. I just left her like that, and then told the tow truck where her car was when he had time. To her credit, she didn't come into my back end screaming like last time, but the screaming was loud enough that one of the managers called Danny, and he came down to the store, and without even talking to me, just backed me, and banned her from the store. I guess she wasn't as good a friend as she thought. Petty yes, rewarding yes. Danny actually gave me a .10 raise right after that and never told me I did anything wrong, so I guess even he thought she had crossed a line. Comments.
She got a lift, you got a raise. Sounds perfect to me. Fork her. Literally. He actually jacked her off. Sadly, I jacked her up, not off. Although, perhaps not sadly, she was a nasty person in every sense.
I threw gummy worms at a woman for talking and using her phone in the theater. A few years ago I was watching Inside Out 2 in theaters. Sitting right in front of me were these two women and a young girl, maybe 7 to 8 years old. Throughout the movie they kept talking and the two women wouldn't stop using their phones. One of the women used hers on full brightness. It was so incredibly disruptive. I happened to have a pack of gummy worms, but didn't want to waste any full worms on her. So, after realizing at some point I couldn't take it anymore, I bit off half of one worm and threw the other half at her, and didn't miss. She turned around and looked in my direction, but I just kept looking straight at the screen as if nothing happened. But then she still wouldn't stop using her phone. So, a few minutes later, I bit off half of another gummy worm and threw the other half at her. That really got her angry. She turned around, looked right at me and said, "Stop it." Again, I just kept looking at the screen as if it wasn't me who threw it. Then she turned to the woman and little girl and said, "He's throwing gummy worms at me." The three of them turned around to look at me, then looked around to see who else could have thrown it. They continued murmuring to each other, then the little girl pointed at me, at least I think it was me, and said, "Well, it definitely wasn't that guy." The three of them turned back around to watch the movie, and the woman finally dimmed her phone, and eventually stopped using it several minutes later. They also shut up for the rest of the movie. The woman also left for a few minutes, presumably to tell the staff on me, but nothing came of it. So for future reference, if you ever see someone talking/using their phone in a movie theater, just throw popcorn or candy at them. They won't know who did it, winky face. Comments.
Should have used soda as a tracer round. I did this last year. Older woman in front of me, all through the first half of the movie. There were only a couple dozen of us in the theater, and she plopped her ass right in front of me. At one point I politely asked her to shut the thing off, which she did for about 2 minutes. I rather loudly told my wife I needed to go to the bathroom, loud enough that the woman would hear me, and OOPs accidentally knocked my half-full cup down the front of her coat. Small kerfuffle, lots of apologies, but she admitted defeat and left. My wife said if I did it again I was a dead man, but it was worth it. It was years and years ago. I went and saw a horror film in theaters, and some lady's phone went off and I jumped. She answered it. I threw starbursts at her head every 15 seconds or so until she hung up. She glared at me. I asked if she wanted another one. My mom was using her phone in a theater and got in trouble with the usher twice. I thought it was funny as hell and she deserved it. She learned her lesson. We went to a theater to see a musical, and my mom was trying to take photos of the opening act. I was trying to tell her to stop when an usher came to tell her to shut off her phone, or she'd be forced to leave. Instant karma.
My dad's petty revenge on 2 rude French tourists. I've posted here before and this didn't happen to me, but to my dad. For context, we're Chinese Indonesian. Back in the 90s, my dad once spent about 2 weeks backpacking across Europe, and in each country he visited, he had a small tradition of getting a simple tattoo as a memory, usually something like a flag or a small symbol. While he was in Helsinki, he went into a tattoo shop to get a Finnish flag done on his back. When he arrived, there were already a couple of French tourists ahead of him. They were loud, rude, and clearly making themselves a problem, talking over people and acting like they were entitled to special treatment, while the staff remained polite and professional. At some point while his friend was getting his tattoo done, one of them asked my dad in English if he was Chinese, to which my dad said yes. The French guy said he had always wanted to have a cool Chinese character tattooed on him and asked my dad to write down the Chinese character for love on a piece of paper for reference. Instead of writing what the man asked for, he wrote a set of Chinese characters that definitely did not mean love, lol. The tattoo artist was probably too overwhelmed to double-check the reference and did the tattoo anyway, or he had just had enough of their rudeness and wanted them gone. To this day, my dad still has no idea if that man ever found out what his tattoo actually meant. I kind of hope he did. My dad still laughs after all these years whenever he tells the story. Oh, the tattoo read by the way, which roughly translates to stupid C*** and T. Comments.
There was a fad back in the late 90s, early aughts, at least in South Africa, for people to get their names and Chinese characters tattooed. The problem was, the tattoo artist didn't read Chinese, so they just had a list of characters that made various sounds. I dated a Taiwanese guy around that time who taught me how to read a few characters and speak a tiny little bit, just enough to have a fun lunch trading insults with his brother. I saw a girl in a club with a word I recognized, horse, so I asked her if she was a big fan horses. Turns out no, not only was she not a fan, but she actively disliked them. She asked me why I would ask her such a thing, and I told her she had the word horse tattooed on her shoulder. She told me it was supposed to be her name, Marie. Well, Horace is pronounced Ma, not sure of what tone, or even how to indicate it, and I told her that. I think she probably had it removed, though. When I left the bathroom, she was staring miserably at her shoulder in the mirror.
Your seat? This happened to me back in the early 2000s. I used to travel a lot and always booked an aisle seat. This very large man had the middle seat next to me. He said his travel department messed up and didn't give him an aisle, and I needed to switch with him. He was a large man, and I'm sure he really did need the aisle more than me. Thing was, he was a true bastard about it. Had he asked nicely, I would have gladly switched with him. He was blocking the aisle so no one could get past him, so I relented. After I moved, he turned to the crowd behind him and said, "Sorry, I had to wait for this lady to move out of my seat." Your seat? My revenge, every 10 minutes or so, I made him get up so I could get out of my seat. I'd stand in the aisle just a few rows behind my row. Just as he settled back in, I came back and made him get up to let me back in. After he got a drink, time for me to get up. Just as he opened food he brought with him, time for me to get up. Closed his eyes, time for me to get up. I did this the whole 3.5-hour flight. It was obviously really inconvenient for him, because he would have to pick up his things, put the tray up, take off his seatbelt, get out, let me out, then put everything back. I still smile when I think about that. Edit, this happened right before September 11th, so about 25 to 26 years ago. Today, I wouldn't move. This happened before seats were different prices, before phones had camera and everybody recorded everything, and flying wasn't near as irksome as it used to be today. Comments.
Him. I need the aisle seat, so you'll have to move. Me. That's a shame. For you anyways. I had a similar one the other day. She asked for the aisle, and I said that if you can find me another aisle I'll move. I'm not doing your logistics for you.
My dad's boss has to pay 3 new people instead of giving my dad the pay that he worked for. For context, I'm a teenager, gender fluid 15, and my younger brother is 11. My family have a good stable life financially, but recently it got better and we're finally able to do things we want now. My dad, 40M, has just gone self-employed because the company he used to work for didn't pay him a good salary for what he actually does. For context, my dad is a floor layer and does little handyman jobs here and there for friends and family. His old boss, we'll call him A, always loved my dad because they started their floor business together. I became the manager and my dad was always the top employee. He did so much for this company that he was going to inherit it when they stepped down. But thing is, every customer who called up usually got my dad because he was happy to go above and beyond to make sure these folks are happy with how the final floor looked. He brought in so much money to this company that he definitely deserved more than he was being paid, practically minimum wage. The injuries he's had while working have ranged from minuscule things like cutting himself, to things like cutting his thumb off and electrocuting himself. So you can imagine he's entitled to the raise he eventually asked for. I agreed to give him the raise. But he never did. My dad asked again, same thing. My dad then put up with this until their friendship was basically falling apart because A was always starting arguments over paying my dad. Claimed he didn't have the money to give him a raise, and yet has a gorgeous house, 2 nice cars as well as the work vans for loading carpets and stuff, and his entire family knows very well he does not need to spend all this money on things that don't matter much. They can live in a normal house, sell one of the cars and be peaceful. But no, A wants to refuse giving a raise to his best employee. So my dad recently put in his 2-week notice. A then started begging my dad not to leave them, to no avail. He offered a pay rise like my dad asked for. My dad declined. He'd been setting this up for a while. My mom and I helped him build his own business from the ground. I work with him on my days off school and I'm going to be doing it for work experience too. I plan to work with him after I'm out of school too. My dad now gets the pay he deserves and still makes people happy with their floors or anything else he's hired for handyman-wise. I post on a TikTok account to help with advertising so he's never short of jobs. Right now he's got 3 weeks of work booked ahead. I then had to hire 3 new people and pay them all what he paid my dad. Each. So he's paying more than what he would have paid my dad had he just given him the raise. And my dad's doing well for himself. When my dad told me about the new hires, I swear I facepalmed so hard there's probably a dent in my skull. What a fool. Comments.
Bizarre as it sounds, this story isn't unusual. Instead of valuing an employee who went beyond and above, management often take them for granted. They are shocked when they finally leave, surprised when a replacement can't carry the same workload, and horrified they have to pay 3x the salaries to get anything close to the same level of functionality. Yet business never learns, and this happens all day every day. Because ignorance often rises to the top. Lower-level workers with good work ethic aren't often selected for management roles because they wouldn't be doing that sweet work the company profits from. Actually had a regional manager tell me I was better where I was. Dickface hired an outsider who absolutely bombed. I found a competitive offer and put in my notice only for that same asshat to come back with a competing offer. Reluctantly had to negotiate, and stayed for 2 more years. Best day of my life, leaving that shithole behind. Now I've more than double my salary and get to directly compete with my previous employer. Best part is that I get to go back and do it in person. A similar thing happened to me. I used to be a manager at a record press. I was in charge of materials, and I also developed and fleshed out their color catalog for their customers. Not only did I create it from the ground up, but I would also create custom colors for clients for specific projects. 150 plus unkaya choices. Well, color! Ha! Me shocked when it was time for a raise, and it was barely an increase at all. 3% increase. Not even enough to deal with inflation, and they gave the title of color coordinator to a guy who was a brown noser, and I had to complain about him passing work on to me for over a year with others, joining in on complaints against him. Shortly after that happened, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. Once they approved all of my PTO for a week off, I told them I wouldn't be coming back. Not only did they have to move that guy into my area, who made more than me despite doing less work, they had to hire another manager because he couldn't keep up with my work, who was also getting paid more than me. They have 25% plastic waste out of their huge stock of PVC because the new manager can barely do the day-to-day tasks, let alone all of the work that he was passing on to me, and then the new manager quit a few months after moving into the area because it was too much work. They would rather pay $120,000 a year total instead of moving me to a new title and an increase to reflect it. Suck it, Memphis Record Pressing. LMAO.
Thanks for watching my video. Please like it and subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories.